Welcome to Your Moment with Miguel Ramirez.
Hello and welcome to Your Moment. This is Miguel Ramirez, and on today's episode, I'm going to be inviting back Raul Chavez. Raul Chavez is going to discuss what influenced him as a professor, and then also share an experience he had that led to a confrontation among his colleagues. My discussion with Raul Chavez.
Big influence on my recent lectures, the direction I've been taking quite a few of my classes. Timothy Wise, a anti-racist activist who's written a few books, but he also produced a documentary titled White Like Me. And in this documentary, he has a clip from the comedian Louis C.K. And Louis C.K. is talking about how it's good to be white. You know, it's good to be white. You know, it's not. I'm not saying that it's better to be white. It's just good to be white. And if I had to sign up for it every year, I'd do it. I'd check off. You know, and I think that's the thing that as Americans, as mainstream, as white America, that we do not comprehend, we're not willing to acknowledge. And that is that we have a privilege that brown people don't get to share. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the African-American activist, once talked about the fact that he had to have the talk with his son. The talk. And the talk recognizes a black father's advice to his black son that someday you may be stopped by the police and you have to act in a certain manner. It's something that is a Chicano that I will have to deal with my son in the future. And that is something that a white father doesn't have to think about. And those are those subtle differences that we misunderstand or that we take out of context. And it's something that we all share as brothers and sisters of that brown experience. What I tell my students, what I try to promote is think brown. Think brown. And it's not, what I'm trying to say with think brown is respect the experience of brown people. Because part of our problem with understanding brown people in America is that we all look at it through that white filter, through that white experience. And it confuses us when we see brown people acting out in a way where, why aren't you happy? What's wrong? We've given you all these things that allow you to participate in, and again, it's our society, our country. Don't want that. I want something else. And I can't have that something else because it runs contrary to what the mainstream thinks of me. And it goes back to at the beginning, you know, what are the misconceptions that we have? It's not just about indigenous peoples. It's brown people in general. Our society, having lived with white privilege for almost 200 years, doesn't know how to see the brown person's side. I only see my side as white. And it distorts the realities of what they see. Again, it goes back to, again, the upbringing, the fact that we live in this culture and this society that promotes this way of thinking. When I did my research, I presented to a group of my colleagues, and I talked about these themes and such. One colleague became upset, and he jumped up out of his seat and, you know, screamed, "So what, you're calling me a racist?" There was a colleague, however, who I'm very grateful of her intervention, pointed out that no, he's not talking about you. He's trying to say that our society has a problem. And so everything kind of calmed down. But I think at our root, what our problem is that, yeah, it at this point, with some 500 years of building upon the principles of white privilege upon white privilege upon white privilege, it's our society that's the problem. And there are good, well-intentioned people out there that don't realize the harm that they do by treating indigenous peoples, people of color, the way they do. And that's part of what the denial factor is. The denial factor prevents us from realizing that it's our society that is the problem. On Monday, we are going to be showing through NASA a documentary that deals with the use of the word that to indigenous peoples is the R word as it relates to the N word. The title of the documentary is More Than a Word, and it examines the use of the NFL football team from Washington, claiming that this is a name that honors Indians, Native Americans. And so our failure as a society to see that allows for the defense that is taken, the position. It's about, it's not an insult, and, you guys have to get over it. This is, something that has nothing whatsoever to do with negative identities and that denial. Again, that goes back to perception that we have of indigenous peoples. They don't fit into, or they do fit into our perception of, again, the backwardness and the noble savage. I always cringe when I use those descriptions, because to mainstream Americans, that's what Indians have done. I joke with students, during my classes about, things that I do at home, and I'll show a movie and they'll, talk about Indians doing this or that, and he says, "Oh yeah, no, we Indians do that. Yeah, it's in the manual that we all have at home. This is how, the first time, I took a scalp, I remember I threw up too. It's ridiculous that people still kind of hold on to those types of beliefs, and that football team's name has its deepest following from that baby boomer generation that the childhood Indians looks at. They're the ones that defend it. The younger generation don't get it. They don't. They're the ones that haven't realized yet, but are starting to realize how offensive it is. And that's why I've helped bring this documentary here to Mount Sac, to try and get the Mount Sac student to understand just the insensitivity of thinking that Indian peoples like to be portrayed as mascots, that they like insensitive images to represent them, and that they like racist names, honoring them. And that's the furthest thing from the truth.
And going back to your book, what would you feel in terms of television and film? What are accurate depictions of indigenous people?
If it's out of Hollywood, nothing. Hollywood has they have an agenda. Or maybe not so much an agenda, but they had a formula. There you go. I think that's probably a more accurate term. They have a formula that recognizes Indians, and they haven't diverted from it. Even after 100 years, through silent films, through the classic Indians that I talk about, the good Indians, through the authentic Indians, we still follow the same formula. That doesn't mean that those films don't exist, but they're independents. Mm-hmm. These are the movies that we're talking about that are produced, directed, scripted by indigenous peoples. And there are many out there. I show in one of my classes a film, an indie, titled The Only Good Indian. And there's a metaphoric twist associated with that title. And I show it to every one of my classes whenever possible, even whether it be U.S. history, whether it be Native American, whether it be my Chicano class. I show it to them because I think it gives natives the agency, that presentation that is more accurate of them as human beings. They're characters in a story. It's a story that is very indigenous in his experience, but there's no feathers, there's no buckskins, there's, they've got their issues, that they're personal issues, their demons that they're dealing with, but there are a few out there. Yeah.
Well, that's going to conclude today's episode. I'd like to thank Raul Chavez for sharing his information and insight into Native American culture. And I'd like to thank you for listening, and have a good day.
Stay up to date with news, interviews, and upcoming show episodes by following Your Moment with Miguel Ramirez on Spreaker.com.